Welcome back to Truth Talk. Today, I'm very excited to have Andrew Bentley with us.
Thank you.
Andrew is one of my dearest friends and one of the most brilliant men I know. And so thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, what makes this so fun to me, okay, is I can't, just my own rules, I can't do this in the pulpit.
Right.
I have a 3-word job description, preach the word. I'm never going to stand there and just go off about Homer for an hour and a half, right? So this is fun to me. And I'm thrilled that you're with me doing it because you're going to bring a perspective that I don't really have. And so it'll be a good thing.
I'm looking forward to it.
So as you heard me talk about the last time, you can go and get a brief thumbnail sketch. We are not trying to exhaustively look through the whole Homeric episode. We're not trying to unpack the Trojan War. We're looking at the characters in this poem and epic from a leadership perspective. And there's a lot in there, isn't there?
There's a lot in there. Not only good stuff, but I'm surprised by the number of violations as well. And I haven't done the math to see if it's, good and bad, but there are clearly some violations that I think would be interesting in bringing out today.
Yeah. And so a little bit about Homer and the whole question of the Iliad that really, I've told him in the last episode, it's embarrassing to me how many times I've read through it from the perspective of love or the perspective of war or whatever. The most attractive 2 ways that I've read it in college, I had to read it through as an analyzation of the mythical gods. And so that was very fascinating because it's not so much that Zeus is a real character. You could, like, if you read it, nix out Zeus and just put in fate. Or Neptune is storms you can't control. So in the ancient Greeks, almost everything they couldn't control had to be a god. So, fate, life. So all of those are capricious and whimsical and you can't control them. So we're not promoting paganistic theologies. And so we're just trying to get to the leadership component of it. There's some questions that I want to get to the listener so that before we even start talking, these questions are kind of the backdrop to it. Here's some of these questions. The Iliad uses these heroes in the epic to challenge really the whole war. And so most everyone in this book believes the war is unjust and meaningless. And so, but then they get to a point where they're not so much fighting for the cause as they're fighting for their own horizontal level of camaraderie and commitment to each other. But there's these underlying questions, and that is a warrior ever justified in challenging his commander? Another key question is, must he sacrifice his life for someone else's cause? You'll find that they all believe this is a catastrophic war, but the question that's never answered is, how was this allowed to start in the first place? Which is interesting because from a leadership perspective, most people get into battles and forget, how did this get started anyhow? So there's so much there. And why, if all parties wish it to be over, why can't it be ended, right? There's got to be a button you can just push and say, there, that goes away. But then there's the question of, is a warrior's death adequately compensated by his glory in battle? And does that justify the loss of him being a dad and a husband because he died valiantly in a pointless battle? And leaders have to ask that. The other thing that everyone needs to think about, so that you don't have to read the whole thing in order to get this podcast episodes, is that the Grecian Empire never had it never had one leader. They were city-states. And so, for instance, Achilles is actually the king, and Nestor is actually the king, and so is Odysseus and Diomedes. They're all the king. And Agamemnon is the king, but he's not the king. He's just the king of kings. That's his title, is king of other kings. So you get a sense of this real coalition that these people don't have to follow you. You have to build the coalition. So this is a master course in leading leaders and leading people who don't really have to follow. So at any point they felt like a skirmish was unjustified, they could, as we see, they'll go lay down by the ships and be like, not fighting this one. Very dumb plan, not going against the wall at midnight. Nope, stupid, I'm going to sleep, right? Yeah. So they have this sense of being able to speak back. So the pressure on, which would be unique to the Grecians and the Argives, as they were called collectively, is the pressure on those leaders is you really couldn't be very autocratic. And so you get a lot of telling people off in the Iliad. They have no problem just rebuking and telling off. So you have this sense of leadership. So then Agamemnon is trying to get them to fight. They don't believe in the war. And so he offers a prize. And he says, okay, fine. You guys don't believe in this and that. How about, do you believe in getting prizes? And they're like, yeah, we can get on board with this. So he says, if you go up and you guys do this and take the wall, this portion of the wall, I will give to the master of that battle this prize, which is the woman Briseis. And so he says, that's yours, right? You're going to get her. Well, then Achilles does it, wins the battle. And this is very typical, right, of even in the Old Testament. Saul did it. You win this, you get my daughter as a prize, right? So this is very typical to this period of time. So the war's already been going on for 9.5 years when book 1 opens, okay? It's a long war. They're already ready to go home. He coaxes them in, and then he realizes, whoops, they actually did more than what I thought. Somebody won the prize. We got to come up with this prize, and he doesn't want to give it away. So he's up fighting. Another soldier says, oh, great, Achilles wins. Here's your woman. And they give him the prize. Well, Agamemnon never intended for the prize to get given. When he gets home and realizes that, he says, you go up to your tent, you get her and bring her back. If you don't, I'm coming to get her. And Achilles is just like, no, you are out of control. So book 1 opens up with that argument. The quarrel goes all the way through until book 16 or 17 before they can finally see through the fog of it, right? Achilles is laying down there the whole time between the ships where the boats are parked, and he's given orders to his men the whole time, but on principle will not go to war. Am I getting the opening pretty good?
Fantastic. It's
okay.
A great, perfect distillation.
Okay, all right. So then they get in this argument, and Agamemnon is the quintessential perfect archetype of the leader who sucks up all the oxygen in the room. He wants all the glory. He wants all the prizes. He wants all the honor. And what set me down this path is Achilles makes one statement and calls him the most awful king. And he says, why do you call me the most awful king? He said, because you are a king, and this is book 1 and like 270, line 270, you are a king who devours his people. Oh. And you're like, wow, that's what leadership has to be acutely aware of. Lead, but don't consume. And so how do you start dealing with leaders who want it all? It's all about them.
Okay. There's about 20 threads there, all of them worthy of pulling on. I think the first thing that I think about there is an incentive. So the misalignment of incentive. There was one prize, and the leader claimed it. That wasn't the intention. The intention was it would go to the person who achieved the outcome.
Right.
It's interesting because I'll bring secular leadership, biblical leadership, and kind of merge them all together. Today in corporate North America, the average CEO makes 399 to 1 in terms of the incentive or compensation that they receive relative to the average worker.
Right.
If you go back to 1965, it was 20 to 1. And so there's so many things that are setting up in this narrative. The fact that he's taking the best prize in of itself says, where are the others who gave of themselves, that committed their blood, their sweat, their tears, their resources? And so there's a real opportunity there for leaders to think about how they incent and how they motivate those people in their care. The fact that he set up a zero-sum game in of itself is probably the first mistake he made. A zero-sum game meaning there's one winner. But like cycling, there's only one winner that maybe crosses the line. But it was the team that got him the success. And so I think there's something there that we have to talk about for leaders to think about, creating zero-sum games of incentive. The fact that there's only one winner. And that there's no compensation, and I don't mean compensation in the material, monetary sense of the word, but there's no recognition, maybe better said, across the entire spectrum of everybody that participated.
Right.
How should the leader think about incentive? We know, and there's lots of writings in regards to incentive, and Daniel Pink does a really good job of this, talking about extrinsic and intrinsic, or heuristic and extrinsic. This idea of incentives only work when it's a very predictable, repeatable, somewhat boring type of task, a menial task, if you will. You can reward with extrinsic modifiers like money. If you do 10, I'll give you $10. If you do 20, I'll give you $50. There are accelerators associated with that. But in cerebral work or heuristical work, where there's complexity, where there's cognitive inputs, those works cannot be incented in the same way that you incent traditional work where it's very, very repeatable. Why that matters to us, because in the kingdom of God, it is more attuned to or akin to cerebral work than it is practical work. We're not doing something so that we can count something. What we're doing is we're changing people's lives. We're transforming people's lives. And the inputs necessary for me to come along beside people and help them in their transformation isn't something you reward with money.
Right.
And so understanding that as the leader, that to me is one of the first mistakes Agamemnon made, is the fact that he set up an incentive program that was a zero-sum game, that was purely monetary, although it was a lady. It was purely monetary.
Right.
It didn't capture the essence of why are they there? Right. What is the purpose behind what they're doing?
And do you think he had to do that because he had an unjust cause as a primary cause, and the prime motivator wasn't good enough? Because he was losing coalition.
Yep.
So he had to come up with something. So from a lesser cause, he finds an even more, lesser cause.
Yes.
And presents it. So you kind of see a downward trajectory, right? That if it isn't set right in the beginning, then you kind of fix it with more bad, right? Do you see that as a part of the problem?
I see it as a possibility. I can't predict what was in his mind. If it was a misunderstanding of how incentive works, that he didn't really understand how to motivate people. There's something called the satisfaction-dissatisfaction paradox. And what the satisfaction-dissatisfaction paradox is what gives me satisfaction, and whether it's money or whatever it is, whatever gives me satisfaction, when removed, doesn't give me an equal and opposite amount of dissatisfaction. And so we have this satisfaction-dissatisfaction paradox that we have to think about, especially as it relates to incentive. And incentive, not only just monetary incentive, but incentive in terms of recognition. How do I recognize those people in my care for the blood, sweat, and tears they put into the purpose that I've hopefully set out for them?
Yeah, that's good.
And understanding that and playing with that is really, really important to the leader. And in a philanthropic or in a charitable church setting, a spiritual setting, we don't have dollars to play with.
Right.
And so the satisfaction-dissatisfaction paradox becomes very, very interesting in terms of how do we create incentives or motivations or these benefits for people to recognize and to continue to tie back into the outcome. And I'll just say, people will do good work for money. They'll do better work for a person, but they'll do their best work for a purpose. And so when you think about incentives, and possibly we'll get into this, is how do you create that alignment or that congruency between what am I doing, what am I trying to achieve, and what is the outcome that ultimately all of us are going to celebrate and enjoy?
And there's a guy in here, his name is Nestor, and he's an old man, right? Because later on in the Iliad, he talks about, when I was your age, I would have done it different, right? But he's reaching out to them, and he says, you're drunk on wrong causes. He says, for the glory is not in a cause and vanity, right? And then he tells him, you'll soon pay for your arrogance with your life and never recognize that you're losing the greatest cause, you're living your life, for a lesser cause. And so Agamemnon never allows this recalibration to happen. So if somebody's struggling with incentivizing, and say this happens in a leadership model, whether it's a church or a parachurch organization or NGO, whatever it is, is there a way that a leader can back up and say that's probably not the cause, the purpose that we should be after? And how does a leader backtrack on purpose and recast that vision?
Well, I think the first part is, a mea culpa is the first, is to say, look, as I look at what we're ultimately trying to create, and again, this is about congruence. It's about alignment between what are we ultimately trying to achieve, what are all the things that set them up for the achievement of that, and then ultimately how do we recognize and celebrate that? And so in my personal belief is in leadership, there's always an opportunity for mea culpa. Like, I feel like we're misaligned. I'm going to realign, whether it's activities, outcomes, incentives. There's always an opportunity to do that.
Okay. Let me jump in and pick your brain here. If there's always an opportunity for a mea culpa, and there's always that chance, okay, is that opportunity and chance greater if you have someone like Nestor who can speak into your life? Do you get a better chance to recalibrate? So like one line here in book 1, it talks about Nestor, and I wrote in the margins, please let my every fight have a Nestor, right? He steps in and it says, thou son of Archias smoldered, glaring across to him, but Nestor rose between them, a man of winning words to speak clarity. If you have that voice in your life that can be a man of winning words, do you think you get a better chance? To any leader who's listening and who is leading leaders, we want that spot where we can back up and say, well, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't have went down that path.
Yeah.
How do we cultivate Nestors in our life that can get in a word in edgewise?
So I think you raise a fabulous point that every leader needs people in his life. I created this sort of 2x2 matrix that basically says there are 4 people in your life that will provide input. And I can't really draw a 2x2 matrix right now, but essentially you have people who are completely apathetic, that have low engagement and low value to the organization. In the top left, you have people who are soloists. They have high engagement to the organization, but low value to the organization because they operate themselves. But they have experience, they have capability. The bottom right, you have high value to the organization, but low engagement. They're the cynics. They're the people that always are complaining about stuff, but they have a point of view. And then the top right corner, you can think about the challengers. And these are the people that are constantly challenge you to rethink your ideas as the leader in a respectful way, in a way that comes along beside you, that recognizes your authority, that recognizes that you own the vision and are setting the vision. But they're challengers to your ideas. And I think all leaders, and I've tried to, in my own leadership life, to say, look, there are cynics, and while they have, low engagement, they have high value to me. And I need to figure out how to hear them as it relates to my leadership. There are soloists that I need to understand. But having nesters in your life, all of us as leaders, notwithstanding that sort of that 2x2 layout, in addition, because those people are always there, you have to cultivate and you have to be proactive to get those nesters in your life. And in sales, we call it out of cycle. And what we mean by that is when you build relationships in a sales climate, building them out of cycle, meaning there's not an RFP, there's not an opportunity in front of you. You're cultivating relationships out of cycle. Those nester relationships have to be cultivated not out of cycle. It's not when I have the biggest crisis in front of me, I say, Pastor Walker, I have this huge crisis in front of me. I need you to speak into my life. Well, you haven't given me a runway. You haven't given me an avenue of expression. You haven't listened to me. All as I can say is yes or no at this place versus all of that relationship we built. And so leaders have to build those into their life out of cycle with people like Nestor.
Yeah, that's good. That's very good. I'm gonna put this on the tee, and if you want to tee off on it, you can. If not, we can move on. I'm just reading what to me is a beautiful line from Nestor. Stop, please. You are both younger than I, and in my time I have struck up with better men than you. But listen now, no more this fight, and all the Trojans, oh, they'd leap for joy to hear you two battling on this way. He's trying to get them to stop seeing. So then he says, so now you, he points at Agamemnon, listen to. Yielding is far better, though more hard, this dreadful work of fighting. Don't seize the girl, Agamemnon. Powerful as you are, leave her just as the sons of Achaia gave her his prize from the very first. Strong as you are, yielding is by far harder.
Yeah.
Like, that's what makes me love Nestor in this story.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me say, oh man, put this guy in my life.
I mean, there's the Nestor piece, but there's something so beautiful about watching two very strong, capable leaders collaborate together. That as a follower, when I see the expression of love and camaraderie and that playing off one another and building and strengthening of two leaders, strong leaders, it's one of the most beautiful sights that they have self-identity. They know that they're so individually capable. And even, further on, they talk about, look, you've done your thing, I've done my thing. We're both pretty good.
Yeah.
Right? For followers to see strong leaders collaborating, it's such a powerful word picture.
It really is.
Yeah.
It is. So as he moves on, he says to them, he said, listen, Agamemnon starts this whining. You've hurt me with words, right? It goes on for chapter. He's so powerful, but then he really is wounded by words. And so all of us are hurt by what people say.
Yeah.
So Achilles is wounded in his pride, and so he wounds back. And so these few lines right here, and then we'll move on, because it shows you how they become entrenched, right? And conflict always entrenches both sides, right? So he says in line 340 of book 1, yes, blazing Achilles broke in quickly, but what a worthless, burnt-out coward I'd be called if I would submit to you and all your orders. Whatever you blurt out, fling them at others, but don't give me commands, never. Then he goes on, once the two had fought it out with words, Battling face to face, both sprang to their feet and broke open the musters beside the Argive squadrons, meaning the battle of words always escalates, right? So you have wounded pride that's taking it to the next level. So they've missed this golden opportunity set up to let an elder speak into their life and say, boys, knock it off. There's a greater cause. They both pass through that, and they're both wounded, and it escalates at this point. Anything you want to weigh in on in dialing back the escalation?
You know, I think about what made Joshua the great leader that he was that he was such an incredible follower. You know, the Bible talks about when Moses would leave the tent of meeting, that Joshua would stay behind. He embraced followership maybe better than anyone I've read in the Bible. And that's what made him such a great leader. And I look at that, you know, Achilles, and whether it's hierarchical or not, king of kings versus king, you know, is one in a place of leadership and one in a place of followership? It doesn't much matter to me. What matters to me is that great leaders are also great followers.
Right.
You know, there's this sense that, you know, oh, they're great leaders, but they could never follow. Boy, then I wonder if they could really achieve the upper echelons of leadership that they ultimately should. And so I look at this and I think that the problem here is neither of them have a good mental model, paradigm, whatever you want to call it, around good followership. And so, you know, we could talk about what does good followership look like in terms of loyalty, in terms of purpose, in terms of self-identity, in terms of being communicative, in terms of work ethic. Like, there's lots to unpack there that we could talk about. But to me, the crux of the matter in that is that neither of them are great followers and may therefore not be able to achieve great leadership.
That's very profound. Yep. And you see it throughout the whole narrative. Like, everybody at some point, like even Agamemnon being a leader, he very much needed to follow Nestor. Yeah. So there's someone that doesn't have the badge, but wisdom trumps that, right? And all leaders have to understand, you know, the hierarchical idea. You may not be in the hierarchy that is rank over me in a stack rank, yep, but you have to listen to wisdom.
Yes.
You may look at them and say, you're not here, but there's certainly some august body of living and life that gives you a voice.
Yes.
Right? And so when you see him, he sends them off saying, okay, if that's not what you guys want, then you're going to do this, but those people out there are going to pay.
Yep.
And neither one of them at that point care, because they're so lacking in emotional intelligence that they can't control. So what's amazing to me about this story is it starts with this pretty private squabble in book 1 between these two kings and Nestor weighing in as a mediator. But before it's over, it is like all the way out to the furthest ranks. And Agamemnon is going to lose his dearest and best friend in his whole life, Patroclus. And when he loses him, that's when it comes to him that he don't even believe in his own cause, right? So he's going to join the ranks with all the rest of them eventually, you know. Okay.
The concentric circles, right? It always, you know, that center of poor leadership and the concentric circles of destruction always happen.
No, you're right. And I don't think in that tightest circle you understand the ripple effect that's coming out. Right? And that's why someone who has seen it before. I talked to an elder this morning, and he told me about something that had happened, and he said, and now that's been 40-something years ago, and we're still dealing with the effects of that in our district. That is so sad to me, right? Because at any point, if you went back to them leaders, they would have never dreamed that someone, Douglas Walker, who's never been in this district, doesn't know any of these people, and now you're seeing when you're preaching, you're going in and out of these districts and going in and out of these fellowship circles, and people's like, yeah, but 30 years ago. And you're like, man, 30 years ago, let's see. I was out running around on a go-kart. I was a kid. And here you are, 40 years old, and you're trying to deal with something, and most of the people involved are gone. And you don't see that when you're in that moment of heat, right? Yeah. So you go through this, and it's so interesting because he sends his guys to Achilles' tent. He pulls out Breseus and all her beauty and handed her over to the men to take away. The two walked back along the Argive ships while she trailed on behind, reluctant every step. And this is kind of a stunning line. And with the strict orders ringing in his ears, Achilles wept. And so for all his far-flung kingdoms, he says, the man disgraces me, seizes and keeps my prize. He tears her away himself, so he weeps and he prays. And so you see this brokenness in their world, and they have to do something about it because pride makes you want to answer that, right? So it's a master course in conflict resolution there. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about followership, you see that even Achilles, as stubborn as he is, he recognizes that there is a greater cause than just my wounded pride. And so he follows them back, and all he can do is just weep it out, kind of, right? But Nestor's the one that grieves the most in this. It's interesting to me. Mm. He grieves not what was lost, but what could have been, right? And I think that's the mark of the true leader. When you see David come and you see Joab furious, right? You've let this guy come in, this Abner guy who was a general the other side. And David's like, but wait, you know how close we are to unifying the kingdom, seeing the big picture come together? Joab couldn't get it. He could not see it. His pride was so wounded, right? And so David weeps when Abner dies, not over the death of Abner necessarily, but the death of what could have been. And that to me is the most glorious indicator of true leaders, is they are obsessed with the unification of the kingdom, not for their own self-aggrandizement. Yeah. You notice that in this story. Is there anywhere where you picked up on that and seen the potential lost?
Nothing occurs to me immediately, but I think, in Paul to Timothy, right? 2 Timothy talks about we share in their suffering. Like this idea and this ability of leaders to share in the suffering of the people and to be a part of the people. And so the lack of potential, the lack of opportunity that isn't actually seized upon, that is in many cases more painful than the achievement. That the lack or the lack of fulfillment of what could have been. It's to your point, I don't want to belabor it. It is the mark of true leadership.
Yeah, and Agamemnon apparently doesn't get it because he's not seeing what you just succinctly said, right? And here you have Achilles, which according to Homer is the greatest warrior. And not only that, he's just self-aware, but he's socially aware, and everyone else. Even so much to later on, when he won't fight, he says, wear my armor out there, and if they see the flash of my helmet, you'll win that battle just because they think I'm on the field. He knows his potential, right? So let's end book one. Let's end it.
Can I just say that potential is always exponential, like the potential with. Like his potential with the army, right? Mm-hmm. And this idea that the flash of his helmet with the army it's the two of them together. It's not the leader in isolation saying, boy, doing all the flexing. The leader with the resource of those in his care, with the purpose, with all of those things, is actually what they fear most. not him. That's Thomas Carlyle, the great man theory, right? History is not a biography of simply great men.
Right.
But it is the synthesis of great men and the great spirit of Achilles and his capability with the army. And I think as leaders, we always have to remember that is the ultimate.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so let me read this, and then you make any closing comments you want. This is the close of book 1, and this is one paragraph of Achilles and how he ends this deal. Okay, book 1, like line 580 something. Yeah. But he raged on, grimly camped by his fast ships, the royal son of Peleus and swift runner Achilles. Now he no longer haunted the meeting grounds where men win glory. Now he no longer went to war, but day after day he ground his heart out, waiting there, yearning, always yearning for the battle cries and combat, never being willing to participate because of pain. Like, here you have this, for lack of better illustration, this Ferrari that pride has ripped its transmission out of it. And he spends the race laying between these fast ships, listening, he wants to be out there, And I think, to your point, the withness, the togetherness, the unity, that's what makes it strong. But that's also what makes this, in my mind, a tragedy, not a history. It's the tragedy of wasted potential and what could have been. Anything you want to comment on about this great leader spending the battle, wanting to be in, but not being able to participate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's self-awareness that while he may have possessed self-awareness, he didn't possess it soon enough, right? That self-awareness is not only the ability to know the state I'm in, the emotional state I'm in, but also to be able to identify it. So the difference between ego and fear.
Okay.
The difference between ego and inadequacy. There are very thin lines between our emotions. And the ability, and there's a bunch of work, Daniel Goleman did a bunch of work that basically said, on average, most people can't clearly or accurately identify the emotion they're currently experiencing. The numbers are like 20 to 30% of the time you can actually identify that when I'm mad, it's actually anger versus inadequacy. I'm not actually mad. I'm resentful of the fact that I wasn't good enough, right? Those are very, very different. The way you internalize it and the way that you remediate it are very different, whether you're feeling inadequate or angry. And so emotional intelligence or quotient is the ability not only to know, but it's the ability to see it before it comes. And when I think about emotional awareness, it's not only the self-awareness of the present state, but it's the self-awareness of the upcoming state. I can see anger coming down the road. I can see inadequacy coming down the road. I can see ego coming down the road. It's not when I'm in it. It's I can see the triggers. I understand what it is that affects me and being able to actually remediate before it gets here. And while I think he understood where he failed, I don't think he was preemptive enough to know when he was about to fail. And that was the loss of opportunity.
That's so good. All right, we got just a hair bit more time, just a tiny bit, because it's that good. I'm just going to go. Ignore the clock over there. Okay. All right. So he's here. He's laying between the ships. He's under the leadership of a glory hog, a limelighter hog. Andrew Bentley is Achilles under Agamemnon. What's your plan out and forward?
Not before, but now.
Yeah.
So I think reconciliation has to be the first step. And it's his own personal mea culpa. So because he has one, and he has to identify what that is. And I think humility is his way out with Agamemnon. I think that is the way out of most conflict. It's I don't love the term falling on your sword. Mm. That's suicidal, not in the truest sense of the word, but that's this suicidal mindset that, so I have to kill my dream, I have to kill my spirit, I have to kill my everything in order to somehow make you look good or somehow to placate you in some way. Yeah. But there is an opportunity for him to say and to understand, Agamemnon, what do you care about? I think the thing that all followers, and whether you're a true follower or it's about leaders leading leaders, that when people are yoked together, that it's so critical that I understand, what do you care about? What are you trying to achieve? What's important to you? So, what's your why? What do you care about? What are the resources that you have to achieve that? What is the structure that you're going to use to achieve that? What are the metrics, or how are you going to quantify what success looks like? How are we going to ultimately celebrate that success? That if I'm going to walk together with you in leadership, that if I don't have a good sense of that, high probability we A, won't reach our potential, and B, that conflict won't be far from us because of our two strong personality, not literally us two, but because of the two leaders' strong personalities. And so I think there has to be a reconciliation, the mea culpa, that says, here's where I failed, but let me understand, what is it that you're ultimately trying to achieve? Because us together can achieve so much more. And maybe we'll save it for the next one, but there's, Paul does such a fabulous job in giving to Timothy sort of the job description, for lack of a better word. And we can talk about that maybe in another time, but it's so well done, and it covers so much ground. And I don't think these gentlemen understand what it is that they're trying to do.
Right. I agree. That's so good. Okay. Pick up next time, and we're moving to book 4. We're going to just touch on book 2 and 3, any stream of consciousness you have on that. But the next episode will be book 4, and where we talked about leadership here, we'll pick up where we left off there. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.